everybody. Welcome to the second podcast in our energy domain. In this one, we're going to be looking primarily at ways in which we thermoregulate. So, boom, let's groove it. So the big questions: why do organisms need to ultimately regulate their conditions, and how is this accomplished? Okay, so those are the kind of the big key things that we're doing. So let's jump right in. So animals are really it when it comes to the ability to regulate temperature. Most other organisms don't have the capability. So this is one of our main homeostasis mechanisms that we use. Even among animals, though, we have organisms that have huge ranges with their ability to actually regulate their temperature. So a lot of animals end up being ectothermic, and this makes them what we call thermoconformers. So even though the ectotherms can affect their temperature by changing their environment. Okay, so this is something to just keep in mind. So this is where we're going to kind of dispel the idea of a warm-blooded versus a cold-blooded animal, right? So let's look at what we mean by this, but we really want to kind of keep this idea to truly what happens in these organisms. So our endotherms and our ectotherms. These, the endotherms are able to maintain a very particular internal temperature, body temperature. These are our birds, our mammals, us. We maintain a body temperature. Our window for variation outside, what we regulate, ends up causing problems pretty quickly. So we have a pretty small temperature window in terms of our ability to function. Your ectotherms, on the other hand, conform. Their temperature basically conforms to what's going on outside. And this is everything else that can do that: reptiles, amphibians, insects. So they do this, but again, bear in mind, they just really have a wider window. They can't function at just any temperature. They're still way too cold, way too hot. That's going to influence their ability to work. But they just have a much wider window. So here we have an example of a fish, of a river otter, and the idea of that thermal regulation. So an otter is a mammal, and so otters are endotherms, whereas a fish is an ectotherm. So you can see how their body temperature shifts in varying temperatures. So the fish has very, very wide range in its relationship to the actual ambient temperature that it's in. The river otter maintains a very steady, stable state, and maintains that homeostasis of their body temperature, which floats, as you can see, right around ours. Pretty cool. So their metabolic activity is how we get a lot of our heat source. So this comes from just the idea of friction. So rub your hands together, right? So friction of molecular movement, and the movement of molecules that causes friction is going to help to produce the heat that we have. So you have your external environment, the molecules that we take in. When we digest and we break things down, heat is lost. When we do stuff, heat is lost. We break other stuff down, do cellular work, heat, as every time energy transfers, heat, and most of it gets removed as that. So endothermic organisms have a higher rate of metabolism than an ectothermic. So here are the 4 key ways that an ectotherm is going to get their energy and their heat, really, in 4 main ways. They're going to have evaporation. That's going to help with regulation, the conduction from the rock. So if you've ever known anybody with an iguana, or have ever owned an iguana or a turtle, how you have to get those heat rocks for them to kind of laze on. So you know about this, like rattlesnakes that would come out and heat themselves on the rocks, on the mountains and stuff, and everything. So, my dad actually remembers kind of walking through the woods in Western Mass where there would be some rattlesnakes that would come out occasionally, and just kind of laze on the rocks during the day and heat up. Radiant heat from the sun, as well as convection in terms of moving air. So all of that are ways that they can get their heat. So controlling that exchange is where things get, tricky. So skin is our major mechanism for heat exchange between animals and the environment. That's our barrier, right? It's what keeps everything inside us in, and allows us to have an actual encounter with our environment. So it's the first that gets that first incoming stimulus. So for us, it's a big factor in our ability to regulate heat. So organisms that live in you know, a pronounced like a heat sink environment, so something like an ocean where there's, you know, changes, utilizes that countercurrent to decrease heat lost in their extremities. So why can they swim around and not like get frostbite? Basically is what that means. So as they're using countercurrent, they're actually helping to warm their blood in that way. So the artery, you know, the artery has warmer, it's going to help with the actual conduction of that heat across, so which is kind of neat. Same thing in the flippers of like a dolphin, so why they, you know, you never really hear of dolphins getting frostbite, or just because. So mammals, you know, are going to utilize their circulatory system, their skin, their muscle processes to maintain these temperatures. So things get too cold, we shiver. Things get too hot, we sweat. We dilate our blood vessels so heat can like radiate off of us. And those are some of the main ways. So here you have sort of a schematic kind of showcasing that. So take a second and kind of jot some of that stuff down and really take a look at what's going on. So here are some other strategies for heat exchange that are going on. So hippos, excuse me, are endothermic, and you can see they like to laze around in the water and in the mud. Lizards are ectothermic, so they're going to hang out and get the conduction off their heat. But what do you think the strategy is with the harbor seal that's endothermic there? Kind of looks like the lizard, doesn't it? And what about a dragonfly that's ectothermic? Okay, so I want you to, in your notes, for the harbor seal and for the dragonfly, jot down what you think that strategy may be for it to have its heat exchange. Okay, so there's just a closer look at our hippos, because hippos. Okay, there's that harbor seal. Check out what it's doing. There's your ectotherm. The lizard's ectothermic, so what's going on there? And what's going on with the dragonfly. So think about these ways for all of these critters and the necessity to have heat exchange and to make sure that their systems are working properly. So how do we measure the metabolism and the rates at which we can do this? So again, lots of ways, but it's measured in organisms by looking at the actual heat exchange and the indicators. So like respiratory rate, heart rate, CO2 production, which will go into respiratory rate. All of these things are going to help us understand what's going on with the actual metabolism. So in ectotherms, it's a function of the temperature. The higher the ambient temperature, the greater the animal's metabolic rate. So you go up, it's going to, you know, be working a lot harder. So standard metabolic rate, you're going to have an ectotherm at rest in a particular temperature. So it's not doing anything, it's just chilling. No pun intended. In endotherms, our basal metabolic rate, you've probably heard of that before, is the minimum metabolic rate of us at rest. So it's not correlated to temperature. All right, so you have that. Your BMR, function of your body size. So with larger organisms consuming more oxygen per hour, less than smaller organisms. Okay, so kind of thinking about that, you know, as why that might be the case. If you're larger, why would this be a function of our size? So here's an example right here. Okay, as you can look, some various organisms and what their BMR is over the course of, you know, looking at body mass indexes. But however, even when we adjust for that metabolism as a function of mass, smaller animals consume far, far less, exponentially less, in fact, oxygen per unit of mass than larger animals. And again, why? What are your thoughts in your notes? Jot down what could be some possible reasons why that happens. So here's that. So we take a peek here at what that one is. Okay, so you can see the body mass, how much oxygen is used per hour. Look at that decrease, like crazy. So there are ways that we can help to sort of budget the energy that we utilize. So the energy requirements for 3 different endotherms and 1 ectotherm. So humans, we got a penguin, we have deer mice, and we have a snake. So here are their budgets for their energy. So you've got the various colors that are there, you know, for reproduction, thermoregulation, so that's actually regulating their heat exchange, actually growing, activity, and what we just do when we're lazing around, that basal standard metabolism, so how things work then. So you can see how things vary depending on size and what are we actually budgeting our energy for, you know, because for each critter it's very different what we actually budget our energy use for. So it is very different. Notice that the ectotherm has to spend no energy on thermoregulation. Why would that be? That piece of the pie is completely missing, right, from the ectotherm. And then comparatively, the size of the endotherm has a greatly reduced energy requirement. So the overall size lessens the need for the amount of energy that you have and what you actually use that energy for. And then we have a process that's known as torpor. And so this is your decreased rate of activity, and this enables organisms to utilize less energy during times when food may be really scarce or unfavorable for some reason. During the night, this happens with very, 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 very small little critters. So here we have little hibernating dormice there. So hibernation is a form of this. It's long-term winter torpor. So our critters that hibernate when food is really scarce, when the cold, you're not, because they're going to have to be putting in energy just for simply thermoregulation, whereas if there's not enough food present, that makes things crazy. And then estivation is long-term summer torpor that can happen as well. In some cases, some organisms will actually, really calm it down during the hot time. So we have our little dormice because dormice, they're just... All right, so this is just some data that you have with hibernation. 2 clock genes, so involved in regulating their activity, the circadian rhythms in active, which is euthermic, okay, and hibernating hamsters. So look at what's going on in terms of day versus night with these 2 genes that regulate, so you've got your amount of your RNA, your percentage of RNA that's made. That's one of the main ways to know whether or not a gene is active is how much RNA is made, and that helps us kind of understand that a little bit. So with that being said, make sure that these are things that you can do with regard to thermoregulation. So why organisms need to regulate, compare the strategies of ectotherms to endotherms, and what are the advantages of being one versus the other? Is there an advantage? What do you think? And how metabolism gets measured in ectotherms rather than endotherms. So these are just some of the kind of general sort of big picture ideas as we look at energy use in organisms. So have a great night, and we'll catch you later.